Thank you so much for joining me for the Fine Watches podcast. Always start with a wrist check. What have you got?
I'm wearing Signum Siege today with green copper turquoise style.
Beautiful.
So it's a quirky sort of field watch design that I made for Signum, one of my brands. So yeah, yourself?
Fabulous. Rainbow.
Oh, nice.
El Zenith.
El Primero Corona. Yep.
AKA the Fiore watch from the Sopranos.
Yep.
I don't think it's appeared anywhere else on the on screen, but yeah, no, I love it. I love it. This is, I do trade a few watches and whatever, but this one is very.
How many chronos have you got?
Oh, no comment. No, lots, and I kind of tossed up between this one and an Omega soccer timer for this one particularly, just because it kind of fit with the aesthetic that I guess we'll talk about, I'm sure, with Straton.
Sure.
And yeah, no, it's I've long been an admirer. In fact, I remember first seeing them in Brooklyn in 2015, Straton, and just going, wow, like this is exactly my aesthetic, because I kind of like the vintage stuff, and being a car man, I love the sort of racing stuff. So yeah, just wasn't in a position to grab one on that particular trip, but have always admired what you've done from afar, and so thrilled I get to chat to you. So
sure. Likewise.
If we can get the very, very brief, sort of origin story. Why watches? I mean, cars we'll get to, but why watches for you?
Sure. I got my first watch gifted to me at about 11 or 12 years old. It was a Lanco dress watch by my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, I collected a few more watches in my teens. And then I always had an entrepreneurial influence with my parents, both, having their own business. And I wanted to start my own business, and I was thinking what to do. And my first business was buying unknown brands and sending them to South Africa. At the time, I wasn't living there. I left South Africa, where I was born, in Cape Town, in 2010, and moved to Switzerland for family reasons. And then, yeah, that was in 2012, I started my first watch business, where, as I said, I would buy unknown watch brands, send them to South Africa, and sell them on like an eBay style website in South Africa, and it took off pretty quickly. I was doing, like, my third month, I was doing about 250 watches a month.
Wow,
it's crazy. It took off really quickly, and basically then it was my dream as a next step to start my own brand. And then it came to fruition in early 2015, when I launched my first Kickstarter.
It's interesting. You mentioned that sort of unknown brands going to South Africa. I was going to ask you a little later in the conversation, but it sort of makes sense to talk about it now. The classic motoring scene, with which the Straton brand sits so closely to, your own Alfetta GT, and obvious sort of inspiration from the sort of racing scene. South Africa seems to have had, for different reasons, historical reasons, whatever, it seems to have sort of developed a kind of a different scene in a lot of areas. So a really well-known one is that the music thing with what was his name, Ramirez, the Sugar Man. Like, he wasn't really known outside of South Africa and all. So I guess the watch scene and the car scene in South Africa, like, England's known for it, Italy's known for it, whatever. What did the car scene and the watch scene look like in South Africa?
Look, South Africa has a very, actually quite an esteemed automotive and also racing history there are a lot of big automotive plants that produce Fords, produce BMWs, VWs. There's quite a big automotive manufacturing scene in South Africa, with international players having plants that build, cars for around the world. And my dad, also growing up, he was a hobby racing and rally driver, and I grew up around sort of classic Alphas and Lancias, very, very modest, nothing expensive, but like it wasn't really expensive back then. But my mom would bring me to school in a Lancia Delta Integrale.
Awesome.
And I love that.
Awesome. Oh,
that was it's people who didn't know it thought it was a Golf 2. And,
yeah.
but ours was left-hand drive, so it couldn't be a Golf 2. So it was unique, and I always enjoyed it. And I think we're getting back to your question. I think like any country watches. I mean, I don't know if you know, but Richmond Group is owned by South African Johan Rupert. So like a third of the Swiss luxury brands are owned by a South African.
Yeah.
So Cartier, and so I think, people who know and understand that, I think what watches are quite prevalent. But yeah. And getting back to cars as well, I think we were very lucky, with the rich motorsport history as well. We had a lot of South African sort of unique cars. One, for example, is the bigger brother of my car, which is the Alfa GDV6, but 3-liter.
Yeah.
South Africa had, because of motorsport, back then it was the BMW 535i and the Ford Sierra XR8, and the Alfa GDV6 at that time was a 2.5-liter. Couldn't keep up with the bigger motors on the straight in South African motorsport. So Alfa South Africa decided, well, we're going to put a 3-liter motor in it. But in order to do that and race, they had to homologate the car, and to do that, they had to produce 225, I think, road-going versions.
Yeah.
So South Africa has the rarest of all the GDVs in the world.
Yeah.
Only 225 made, and a few years ago, the rest of the world cottoned on, and they started buying them up, and now they're become very rare collector's items around the world. So motorsport's definitely a huge thing in South Africa, or was. Yeah.
I mean, it sort of seems that from what I can gather from the brand, that you have a very sort of pure appreciation of motoring, and to drive an Alfa GT, to drive an Alfetta GT, it's such a low tech car. It's something that's really pure to drive, and I guess that can you comment on how that influenced not only the aesthetic of Straton specifically, but did that sort of influence the kind of the price point at which you sell and the philosophy under which you create your products?
Sure. So I think going right back to the start, if it wasn't for my car, I probably wouldn't be where I am now. That was basically the start of it all, because the vintage driver, which was my first watch, was inspired by my Alfetta GT, the Veglia Borletti tachometer of the dial, was inspired directly from the car. The intro video, the whole launch was surrounded about the story of me the car and my love for sort of 70s retro chronographs.
Mm.
For my first design, because it was influenced by the car, but also on top of that, the design as a whole was, if you compare it to the rest of my line, was sort of almost very held back because I was on a shoestring budget.
Sure.
I had a total of $2,000 available to get the prototypes done.
Mm.
And I think anybody who's gone down that route of trying to start their own watch and having prototypes made these days, you're looking at anywhere 5 to 10 grand if you want to
Sure.
make like 5 prototypes, etc. But I had 2 grand back then, and I got the first prototypes, and I posted them on sort of Facebook groups, and I asked for some feedback, constructive feedback, and I got that. For example, the sort of the logo positioning, etc., and I refined the design through feedback.
Mm.
And because of the changes, I had to have the dials completely remade,
Mm.
and my budget was sort of almost completely used up. So when I had the final set of prototypes made, they actually didn't have movements in them.
Right.
We glued the hands to 10 and 10.
Yeah, yeah.
Like Rolex and like other
Of
brands
course.
do for the show watches in the
Yeah.
windows. I glued the hands to 1010, and I used those as the prototypes for shooting doing the photo shoot, doing the video. The introduction video was I shot with my iPhone. I don't know back then what it was, like 6 or 7,
Yeah.
and I bought like a tripod, and I was in the hills in near Zurich, Switzerland, and I like placed the tripod, and I got in my car and I drove away, and I just left it there, and I drove past. I filmed the whole video myself. I'd never produced any video or cut or did anything, so I did it really. It was on a shoestring budget,
Yeah.
and yeah, I simply just wanted to reach the goal. Back then it was 15,000 over 30 days, and when I launched, I still remember the day like it happened yesterday. um, I hit that target within an hour,
Yeah. Wow.
and I was just completely blown away.
Well, you
I
told
never
such a pure
expected it.
story, right? Like it's, I think that there are so many Kickstarter brands that, tell this story and that story and have
Yep,
better or worse aesthetic and all that. But,
sure.
that
I
video
think I
is,
started also just before the big rush.
yeah,
um, After I started, there was a huge rush of Kickstarter brands. It exploded in a big way. So I think on one end, I think I got lucky. I don't know if I would have the same success if I had sort of maybe launched 2 years later.
yeah. Well, I mean, that was going to be
It
one of
was
my questions.
timing, I think.
That was going to be one
Yeah.
of my questions. Is that there have been so many, it's the last few years really has seen, maybe 10, but certainly recently the rise of the sort of the micro brand or independent brand. I mean, you only have to look at yourself. You look at, Full and Mari, another Kickstarter project. Farah doing their sort of specific thing. I mean, even
Yeah.
Spinnaker recently with the 50 Phantoms. I mean, I've kind of always liked their aesthetic, but that 50 Phantoms just kind of blew up a lot. Um, what do you think? Like, what do you think? Do you owe that success to? Like, do you think it's a consistent thing across the brands, or was it luck, as you just said, for Stratton? Or
I think it was a combination of things. I think it was right timing, but also a genuine story, a story people could relate to.
hmm,
Um, and then I think from there it was just, if you compare my first watch to my second watch was Straton, it was the vintage driver to the Curve Chrono.
Mm.
That again was another story in itself, learning process for me in the field of launching a watch. The aesthetics are there. I could really be creative and have the influence of, because I'd been collecting sort of 70s chronographs, basically what you could call micro brands back then, sort of
Mm.
brands like Arola, um, multiple other small unknown brands. Because back then, what factories were doing in Switzerland is producing a design, and then basically that design would be sold off in batches to people, excuse me, who
Mm.
could choose to put their brand name on that dial. So you had the same design from
Mm.
various brands, and that's how it worked. Um, yeah, so I think it's a combination of factors. Um, and then basically from there, just the consistency in sort of styling. I didn't really deviate much from my passion with
Mm.
Straton in terms of keeping the brand cohesiveness with the design, especially the fact that my first watch had Straton written completely on the dial, whereas from my second watch I chose only the S.
Mm.
And a little story related to that is in my second year, I had some professor of marketing from some astute American university. He said to me, the reason why I won't be in business is, he said, who did I think I am? Because just having my logo as my a symbol as a logo, the S, uh, how can people know who I am and relate to who I am by
Mm.
just that? I don't have the brand, of Coca-Cola behind me. So I just said to him, my answer was, uh, I would be glad to prove you wrong, because my focus after sort of choosing just the S was, I I wanted the styling to speak for itself,
Mm.
and I wanted people to, my aim was, to people who maybe knew one or two of my watches in the future, they would see a Stratton design, and without even looking at the logo, they will be able to tell it's a Stratton design.
Sure.
And that sort of started happening already with my third and fourth watch. People were like, "Yeah, that's a Stratton."
Mm.
So that was my goal really, to keep the cohesive styling, because that's my love. I mean, 70s chronographs, that era in terms of styling and color, for me is just, there's no era better
Mm. Oh, look, I agree. I mean,
than that.
that's certainly my favorite. I mean, obviously there's beautiful watches from every era, and it's a as Fred Mandelbaum said in our conversation, it's a very, very deep
Oh,
lagoon.
Fred.
Yeah, it's a
I know
very,
Fred
very
well.
he's a very,
I know.
very good man, and very interesting. And when he posted about the Universal Genève news from Breitling, I was like, wow, like that is the best news for a long time. I think that's amazing. But yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that sort of aesthetic shift from the driver is, was there were, from my eyes, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if I've missed models,
Sure.
but from my eyes that was the way I would describe it. It was like a modern design that was inspired by past design, whereas the rest of your your oeuvre, or your repertoire is quite distinct. Like these could be watches that were released in the 60s or 70s. Like if you didn't know
Yeah.
that this was a modern watch, the design cues and the fonts used and the colors used and all that sort of stuff is quite distinctly, for want of a
Yeah.
better word, and you're probably grown, is quite distinctly retro vintage, right? So what influenced you to sort of make that switch after the success of the
Uh,
first model?
Look, I don't think it was so much of an influence. I think it was more with my first watches. I had the influence from the car. So the dial is really the strongest point there. It's
Yeah.
a strong influence of the Veglia Borletti tachometer. The
Mm,
case is more modern, yes.
mm,
But the reason I was restricted there is cost.
sure.
I couldn't be as creative as I wanted to because I had a tight budget.
Sure.
So that is where, with the success of the first watches, where I could, let loose and really, design something that to me is my kind of watch.
Sure.
Yeah,
Can we talk about that sort of that the ongoing what I would you may have a different sort of brand word for it, or ethos word for it, but for me it's sort of retro racing style.
sure. Yeah,
The design cues that I'm seeing of sort of shaped subdials, the use of colors, the case shapes, all of those things are from, again, as I said, my favorite kind of era. Um, to me, I kind of get Movado TV dial, El
yep,
Primero vibes. I get Universal Genève Unicompax vibes. I get
yep,
sort of that 70s Omega sort of they had that sort of that Speedmaster Mark II, Mark III sort of case vibes. Like,
yep.
can you talk about some of the individual pieces that might have inspired you with some of the pieces that you've produced?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always explain my watches in this way. I would say it's not a copy of any one watch from the past.
Mm,
It's taking design cues from multiple watches
yes.
and creating my own interpretation of an era. So what I'll do is I'll start with sort of a case design,
Mm,
and I'll find a case I like, and I will. I mean, even in the case of my latest one, which was the Cuff Buster,
yeah.
which was my most sort of out there watch, even that the dimensions aren't exactly the same.
Yeah.
They're slightly different. Even the plate on the side is even bigger than the original.
Yeah.
So I wanted to really exaggerate, sort of be in your face in terms of the styling there.
Yeah.
So, and then, and for example, there the dial is completely like I've
It's
made it
completely
mine.
different. No, it's completely different.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, I think I was sorry to interrupt you, but I was going to actually ask this question that can we talk for a minute about homage versus inspiration? So
yeah. Sure,
there
sure.
are Stratton in my eyes, you borrow or use some fairly ubiquitous design cues that were
Yeah,
used quite consistently throughout the period. So, for
yeah.
example, as I was saying, the shaped subdials that you use on the synchro and on the and
Speciale, I think.
speciale or whatever, like those things where you can't point to, okay, the Breitling whatever did that, or the Anycard did this. Like, it was something that was used very, very consistently throughout the period, and really is for lovers of vintage pieces, really represents individual pieces of that period's design. The same with
Yeah,
cases. Um, there are definitely watches. I mean, the Cuffbuster is very arguably I guess an homage watch, but you still made it your own.
yeah.
Like, it was not just a straight
Exactly.
copy. But there are
Yeah,
people out there who design homage watches that are just the same thing with a different brand on.
yeah.
And so can you sort of comment not just about your own pieces, but how you sort of feel about, I mean, I love your pieces because you do that, because you basically design new 60s and 70s watches that could have been from then. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on this kind of homage kind of inspiration movement that's about.
Sure. Um, I think relating to me personally, yes, I would say my pieces are more an interpretation of the era, sort of taking small pieces of various watches to create my own. Um, in terms of other brands, I think it's
You don't have to name and shame. It's just,
no.
yeah.
It's a double-edged sword because I've seen it myself, especially in the micro brand market. But I have seen a shift really in the last year. Um, I would say before that, the market was saying they wanted something different, but in actual fact, they were just buying the same old designs. It was almost like buyers were scared to move outside of what was normal for them.
Mm,
So homage watches, really, also from micro brands, were quite well supported.
mm,
Um, guys were buying them. I think what's happened now is it's gotten to the point where the market has become so saturated
mm.
that people are really now starting to say, well, my collection's full of watches that look like this.
It's the same watch. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, yeah, I need now to get something different.
Mm,
That's where I've seen sort of the shift now in the micro brand market where it's almost like you're expected to customize really to the point where it's something completely new, sort of going horology type
mm,
direction, you
mm,
know, doing like, I mean, not on the level of MB&F, but sort of doing, something completely different.
mm,
And I've seen it because the market is, I think, just so saturated at the moment. Look, there will always be the brands that bring out more generic designs, and we see it a lot now with the rise of the Chinese factory brands.
mm,
So I think that there people also need to make a big distinction is the Chinese factory brands, and here I'm talking about like um, Pagani
mm,
design, those types of brands. Those are what we call in the micro brand world factory brands. So
mm,
these are basically factories that there is no one factory in China that produce all the parts. I'm sure you're aware of maybe how the industry works, especially in
mm,
China, is you have basically what we call a manufacturer who's a coordinator.
mm,
They're basically only the assembler and the arranger of all the parts.
mm,
They don't generally normally make any of the parts.
mm,
There are single factories in China that make cases, that make dials, that make hands, that make
mm,
crystals. And all the manufacturer does is they have an engineer who does the drawing, technical drawing,
mm,
pieces those parts, and then they have a project manager who then goes out and gets all the parts made from all the factories. And then those parts come, and then at that manufacturer, they're assembled and packaged and then delivered to the client. That's
mm.
how the industry sort of typically works. And we've seen a rise in the factory brand, which is in most cases, it's likely one of these arrangers who
Mm.
work for micro brands, and they saw a gap.
But
And
is that from a collector's point of view and a trader's point of view and a watch enthusiast
yeah,
point of view? Like I would never even. This is a surprise. Like to me, when I asked that question, I kind of thought maybe we'd be talking about Unimatic. Maybe we're going to be talking about again, maybe Spinnaker. Like some of Messina's
even
work.
Spinnaker is
Oh,
a Dartmouth brand, right? They're not even a micro brand.
oh, of course,
They're owned by Dartmouth. Yeah,
no, for sure. But I guess in terms of it's not the Rolex or Omega or Longines or it's a smaller brand that typically offers a quality product to watch enthusiasts who aren't worried about, oh, I've got a Rolex. Like they're worried about, hey, I've got this watch which I really like. I'm looking forward so much to my $400, Spinnaker 50 Fathoms, because 50 Phantoms, because it's just fucking cool. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
thing. And I know that it's not haute horology. It's not like the Mad One. It's not, not even remotely like a Renaissance. Do you know what I mean? A Renaissance or whatever.
Yeah.
It's more just, do you think that those, Paganis, and what's the one that does I'm just trying to think, there's one that just straight out makes Rolex Submariners beginning with an S. It's a German Steinhardt. Like
Steinhardt. Yeah.
anybody who knows the basics this is just, you're just buying just a rip off. Like it's not even, to me, it's almost worse than a fake, because it's no one designed it. You're just using cheap bits to make somebody else's watch. When
Yeah.
people like yourself and Unimatic and Full and Murray, like clearly there were very, very strong influences in the face, the hands, the case, everything, but they made something that was of very high quality in terms of what went into it and the consideration of usability as a modern watch. So it's interesting that you say that the sort of homage market, and you've gone to Pagani, because to me, and maybe to other listeners, I don't know, please comment in the, like and comment or whatever, but to me, they're just rubbish. Like it's not even, doesn't even come into a consideration compared to a watch for 500 or $1,300 of yours. Like it's just not the same market, right?
So I think, yeah, I do agree, but I think there's of course a market for it. It's clear because the rise of the factory brand. There's always going to be guys out there who are just not going to want to spend the amount on the real thing. And yeah, maybe they won't wear a fake, but they will wear something with another logo on it.
Sure.
Um,
So I thought you were
yeah,
going to mention
I think
that seagull thing that came out a while back. There was this sort of vintage pilot's watch with a cream face with a seagull. I've forgotten what exactly it's called, but that's kind of a cool watch. Like it's not copying anything, and it's
yeah.
taking a specific design. Um, yeah, I mean that's why I've always been fascinated with your brand, is that yourself, I think Farah do a
Yeah, I follow them. They're
follow a
good brand.
similar ethos in terms of what they create. Um, really understanding that, there was a time. I actually spoke to Paul Sweetenham on the pod as well, and he
Okay.
sort of rejoiced in the fact that period of time of the 60s and early 70s was in society this kind of unbridled joy of creation and exploration, and fuck it, let's just make it bigger and put colors and put
Yeah.
a huge band that has holes in it, and like
Pushing the boundaries. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I guess that's one of the reasons I was so keen to talk to you about this, you've so strongly captured that without, for want of a better word, plagiarism. Like you've
Sure.
used the best of that design, and design is always tropes. Like you have to, you only have to look at, nouveau, Art Nouveau, modernism, blah blah blah, music. There are times and epochs, but
Yeah.
it's all about influence and actually taking something and putting something in yourself. So can you tell us about your process? So from your pen and your initial sketch of what you want, so do you then pass that on to an industrial designer to do the kind of millimeter perfect stuff, or how far down the line do you get before
So
prototyping kind of
I'm
thing?
involved. So I'm involved in every step of the way, and how I do it is I don't physically put pen to paper. So what I do is, as I literally say, I find the small details which I like. So I'll start with a case design,
Mm.
and I literally just use Photoshop, and I point out to I deal with my manufacturer, the owner. I deal with him direct,
Mm.
and basically what I do in the evenings, I would sit and point out, use a little arrow, and I'd say, I want this angle to be changed. I want that surface 1 millimeter, wider. I want this angle changed, and yep, done.
Yeah.
And then I would literally send the changes off, and within 24 hours, I would get the design changes back, and then I would continue on the process. I would maybe find an initial sort of, let's say, hour markers or indexes, or the checkered markings, and I would say,
Mm.
I want this inserted there, that inserted there. And there's always this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it takes about 1 to 1.5 months of
Mm.
back and forth, like 1,000 changes. And to where I'm happy with the design. And I know it's done, because when I look at it, I just take a deep breath and I say, that's it.
That's
I'm
cool.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really know when I look at, because to me, balance is everything.
Mm.
And maybe one of my biggest, almost difficult designs to get right was the Speciale with the 7750 layout with the day date.
Mm.
So the 7750 Valjoux day date sort of layout in itself already is you've got the day date on the right hand side, you've got
Mm.
the subdials at 12, 9, and 6.
Mm.
And I must have spent around 1.5 months only. The design was complete, except for where was I going to put the logo and the brand name.
Mm.
And because I'm such a balance sort of crazy, um, I couldn't settle on that one position where I said, okay, it's perfectly asymmetrical, it's balanced, everything's done.
Mm.
And I had to sort of find, even now, I'm happy, really happy with how it turned out. It's Straton's biggest seller by far.
Mm.
I've done sort of seven full productions, sort of sold over 3,500 pieces
Mm.
worldwide. Um, and yeah, so balance is a big thing for me. But my designs are very busy, right? So
Mm.
it's a balanced busy. So like date, usually that's why I like date windows at 6,
Mm.
especially with the S logo. It balances out perfectly, having just the S and the logo at 6. And then
Mm.
also extremely important to me is um, the framing of a date window. To me, it's
Mm.
extremely important.
Mm.
To me, there's almost nothing worse than just having a dial and just having a cutout for the date.
I think Seiko
Um,
nailed that during that period, didn't they? Seiko were masters of framing of dates and applique framing, particularly of dates on their sort of 60s and 70s chronos. You often see the
yeah,
date frame hanging in the bottom of some bad condition
it comes
vintage
up.
model or whatever on but the Japanese were very, very good at that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it just finishes it off. It gives a proper finished feel to a date window.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just maybe one of my pet peeves of when I see a high end brand and I love the design, but it's just you got this cutout for the date. And
Yeah.
maybe sometimes they just angle it in, which is okay, but sometimes it's just a straight box cut.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on, guys, come on.
Finish it off. Indeed. Indeed. In an industry where prices seem to rise with every new model, and sort of prestige premium is something that's growing and growing with the established brands. Omegas used to be affordable, Rolex used to be affordable, whatever. Can you tell us about your own thinking about positioning Straton, which has now been around for some time, at still a very, very affordable end of the market?
I think from my perspective, I've catered towards a specific market in terms of price. And I think specifically because I have also the automotive aspect, that's probably one of the reasons why I've in many cases launched an automatic and a quartz version of a piece. In many circumstances, especially when it comes to the chronographs, is the fact that not only watch people buy my watches. So some people really like the look, but don't really worry what's inside. So I think from that aspect, catering to something that's a little more affordable, and then for those who are real purists, I mean, I appreciate a mechanical movement. If I have the choice, I'll prefer a mechanical movement over a quartz one. But I mean, there are days that I just pick any watch. It doesn't matter what's inside, just because I like the look.
Sure.
So I think from a pricing perspective, there, yeah, I try and keep it within, that range that I always have been, and that's been from 300 to 1200.
Yeah. So it's really okay. So you think it's that the watch people will pay more, but the car guys love the look. $500, $600, $1,000, pay that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think not specifically related to cost that watch people will pay more. I just know that if a purist or person who has the choice between mechanical and quartz and they prefer mechanical, they'll just buy the mechanical one.
Sure.
I mean, there is unfortunately an added cost to that. It's a
Sure.
more intense assembly process. The movement, of course, is much more expensive, especially when we're talking mechanical chronographs. So I think from there, I don't focus too much on price. I just know that I'm there offering a certain amount of value. And yeah, sometimes I get, but $500 is too much for a quartz watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
My response to that is the sum of a watch isn't, sort of made up by the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that no one should work for free.
Sure.
A business is there obviously to make money and grow, but in my perspective, I'm not doing this based on purely profit, but based on the fact that I want to grow the brand. And
Sure.
the only way to grow the brand is to turn a profit. And, turning a profit to grow the business is ultimately the goal. And I believe that styling does have an effect there. And I think I cater to a certain area of the market which likes retro styling, and I think I capture that aesthetic pretty well.
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt.
And I think that I think it's reasonable, very reasonable what I charge for
Look, I
for the watches.
100% agree, and that's the essence of my question. Is that
Yeah,
you sort of, I mean, there's yourself. I mean, you look at, say, someone like Unimatic, they do the same thing, like with the very, very rare exception of a couple of the collabs, they're around that same sort of well under $2,000 mark. And I think that's one big aspect of success for the sort of micro brands or independent brands in the industry. I think the other thing that we've sort of touched on before in the conversation is the personal contact. And
Absolutely.
you actually have an ad that comes, which has got a great watch from the CEO himself, is the sort of starting line of your advertisement, which I assume comes from, a testimonial that was somewhere, or a post in a forum or something. I
Yeah,
think.
it was a post in a forum on
But
what you see. Can't remember that. Yeah.
talking to people talking to Max Busser, talking to Benoit Minches, I know from my own experience of dealing with Clement and Love Insure. I mean, even Jacob at Jacob and Co. Like all of those founders are people who have done something really exceptional and something that's known and stands out, yourself included. But you can talk to these people, which is remarkable. I mean, is that something? And well, you had a social post this week, which was interesting, which we can discuss or not discuss as you see fit. But is that sort of something that you see happening going forward? I mean, is that something you enjoy? Is sort of having contact with the fans of your watches and the customers who buy it, or is that sort of a business move?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something I enjoy. Putting myself out there. I mean, I've if you're in Facebook groups, across multiple watch groups, I post sort of religiously once a day,
Yeah,
and it's not purely advertising based posts. Majority of the time, I don't even mention the brand name. I think for me, it's more about engaging. I also give my opinion and assist other brands as well as potential customers or just people asking for advice or whatever. I try and be involved and give back to the community and being the face of the brand. That's something I enjoy and enjoy doing. Yeah.
I think it's something that's one of the things that draws me to the watch community. I mean, you get the people who, I was just saying before we started, I had this guy. I've got a beautiful, basically new old stock watch consigned for sale on Chrono at the moment, and I had some bloke in England, picking apart whether the booklet was right for the watch and all this, and I know it's right because these people bought the watch themselves
Yeah.
in Hong Kong in 1970. So if it's not right, the then dealer gave them the wrong booklet. But it was, so you get those people, but I think most of the community is, the true watch enthusiasts. People are just as thrilled to see, your cool swatch as they are your, A. Langer and so on. Maybe a bit
Yeah.
more excited for the Langer and so on, but you know what I'm saying. And certainly helping. I think that it's one of the things that I enjoy in my own through the podcast and my own watch trading business is just when people ring and say, look, I've got this much to spend, and I'm thinking of this big hype brand, and then I'm like, look, you can buy these three, which are so
Yeah.
different, give you something. I always find that really, really enjoyable. um so it's a big part of the community for me anyway.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
And let's talk about Signum for a little bit. Totally different, completely
Yeah.
different aesthetic, obviously a different brand. More of that sort of tool watch, military style divers, that kind of stuff, solid type watches, and use these amazing materials for dials and all that. Can you tell us a bit about your work with and the inspiration? Because we know the inspiration with Straton, but can you tell us a bit more
Yeah.
about Signum?
Sure. So I think I often get the question, sort of, why did I make a second brand? I just think I didn't want to dilute Straton's brand image by making something that's just not completely, which is completely not relatable to the aesthetic of the brand. So I very much, as a kid, enjoyed collecting, rock and mineral samples. I used to buy those magazines, and each magazine would have a little plastic thing with a different mineral in
Yeah, yeah,
every month, and I would collect those and put those in my bedroom. And um, I wanted to start a brand that used unique materials, whether man-made or natural, and that's when I founded Signum in 2020. That was just the start of the pandemic.
uh,
Um, and yeah, it was just using my creativity in that space to do something different, um, completely different to what Straton makes, and just express my creativity in that side. It was a bit difficult, I must say, because when designing the my Straton watches, especially, I love chronographs. I've said that before, and I just think divers or three-hand watches just look very plain.
sure.
So it was like when I was designing, the Signums, I was like, it needs something more. It's missing two subdials. It's
Yeah,
it's missing a tachymeter. It's
yeah,
scale. I had to fight with myself, and I think it's done. It's only a three hand. It's only a diver. You can't do anything more. So look, for me, Signum is the 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 designs are often very sort of plain, but that's done intentionally because I want the dial to stand out.
sure.
And I don't do things by the book, right? So I don't conform, so to say, to any norm. So, guys will say, "Oh, but how can you put such a nice dial in a diver watch? It should be on a dress watch." Well, that's just because I always use this line, and you can never please everybody, but I make things I personally like, and for me, it's just a bonus if some other people like it too.
Sure.
So yeah, so I think with the unique dials, and especially some of them are a first for any watch brand ever.
Yeah,
Um, it's been a cool journey to experiment, like finding the actual mineral piece.
yeah,
And then I don't personally drill and cut and
yeah,
prepare the dials,
yeah,
but going through that whole process and learning what it takes to get there, and falling down, and then telling my supplier, telling me this is impossible, we can't do this,
yeah,
to me finding a way and showing them maybe we can do it, try it this way,
yeah,
and then eventually getting it done. It isn't always possible,
yeah,
but certainly on ones where I believe that I think it was possible. It was a trial and error process. And I think from a price perspective, the Signums are a lot more aggressively priced for the cost.
yeah,
My margins are smaller
yeah,
on Signum than they are with Straton. So I believe I'm offering a lot of value, really, for what's the work, intense work that's behind.
sure,
And the reason I'm priced so aggressively in Signum space, I just think it's so much more competitive.
sure. Do you have
Yeah.
an intention, I guess, in the future of wanting to take either of the brands to not necessarily as a core range, but to have maybe one or two $3,000, $5,000 pieces, $10,000 pieces. Is that the idea
Yeah,
going forward?
yeah. I'm actually busy in the process with both brands, experimenting with something in that sort of price range above 3K.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Going back to what you were saying about the cutting of the dials, can you tell us about a mineral that didn't work, or a material that you thought was going to work but it just didn't cut properly?
um, yes, there's a mineral called eupolite. It's found on the shores of a lake. I've forgotten the lake's name. It was a year and a half, 2 years back, but it's North America, and basically, if you take a UV light and you shine it on this mineral, it lights up,
Wow.
and it was just super cool. And we tried doing the normal process, and the material was just too brittle. It
Brittle,
just
yeah,
broke
yeah,
up
yeah,
into a million pieces.
yeah,
And there are other ways of trying to stabilize, like you actually throw the mineral in glue, in a clear glue, and you
yeah,
leave it for a week
yeah.
to set, to stabilize, and then you drill the cylinders. But still, even after drilling the cylinders and then trying to drill the
Slices.
zero point
Yeah,
0.4 millimeter slices,
yeah.
it just wasn't sticking together. Another one was pyrite.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Um, it worked. However, there were sort of holes in the dial.
Mm.
It's cool to a certain extent. I've still got all the dials. I haven't put on any indexes or chapter rings, but it's just like, pyrite, right?
Sure, it's
It's
fool's
gold.
gold, no?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And it's not that it breaks apart, but it's just not dense and solid. So it's got sort of small
yeah, yeah, yeah,
pieces,
yeah, yeah.
which is a cool effect.
Interesting. Yeah, I
But
mean, there are so many people doing really interesting things with dials. I mean, you know, at the sort of simplest end, the dial artist modifying things, and Black Badger doing. I was always fascinated with Fordite.
loom,
That's cool.
yeah,
Loom stuff. Absolutely, it's super super cool. It's yeah, no, the Signum watches are lovely, and the different materials kind of make them stand out. And there's quite a few brands that I think that play in that sort of,
space,
for
yeah.
want of a better word, nouveau tool space. But not all of them necessarily uses interesting materials and everything, which is cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Next one I'm experimenting with is, I've got it here. That this is a prototype, but it's going to be,
oh,
so it's like a stained glass motif,
oh, yeah, yeah.
but it's going to be, I want it to be an actual mosaic.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's cool.
So really, it's going to be small pieces of either stained glass or mother of pearl pieced together to look like a stained glass church sort of
Yeah,
type
cool. You have to
window.
speak to
So
some of the
something.
lacquer artists at Jaeger or something. There's your $10,000 piece.
The dial itself, it's $150 cost price,
Yeah, wow.
just the
Yeah,
dial.
yeah.
So
It's gorgeous. It's really nice. It's very pretty. I like that. That's
just
cool.
different, just
That's
different.
cool. I think, like, I love the sort of playful stuff. Like, I think we talked about the Snoopy, the white Snoopy, and then, subsequent Snoopies, and the Oris style with the Oris Kermit with the
Kermit, yeah.
style, and the little one once a month he just pops his head out. I love that kind of playful stuff, and I think that, watches uh
especially in the tool space, have, as you said, they kind of look like they're just such function over form, if that makes sense, or form for
Yeah,
function. And it's
yeah,
nice to have something a little bit, a
a
little bit,
little bit more
a little
playful.
bit different. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely. So it's
Yeah,
interesting. It's talking generally that the I've always loved the racing watches, and over the years you could get some of the older stuff for very reasonable prices, but they're all just going bananas. Brands like Universal Genève, any car. I mean, I remember you could get any cars for $500. Like no one wanted.
yeah, all the Valjoux 7733s and
Oh,
7734s, you could get them for under
thousands of
500.
nothing, absolutely nothing, and now they're huge. I was
2 grand above, yeah.
Yeah, I was very happy although I was happy when Breitling announced their revival of Universal Genève. Hopefully, they do that justice and bring out some of the beautiful models that they've stocked. But do you think that I mean, Straton embodies that period beautifully, and a lot of the sort of older brands like we just mentioned, Breitling have re-released some colourful chronos in the last few years. Namely, I'm thinking of the Top Time car
Top time.
line, which to me was such a pity because I would basically wear any of those watches except for the fact that they have, a Mustang logo on the front or whatever. Like I just, I'm a car guy for sure, but put the logo on the back and let me wear a beautiful watch on the front is my take on it.
Yeah, it's a fine line. It's a fine line um, between some people wanting it and some people just want to be neutral, that they don't want to connect it to anything
But
specific.
but how many? I mean, if you were
Yeah.
genuinely a Mustang owner, like, how many Mustang owners are going to go and buy that watch? So you're not putting Mustang on there for the Mustang
I,
people.
I, I
It's just
think
that
if they made like 5,000 pieces, I'm pretty sure they could sell worldwide. I mean, Mustangs, it's got a
I think
massive
it's an
following. It's
unlimited
been
line,
around
though.
for a long time.
That Top Time's unlimited line, though, right? So it's they're kind of pretty confident.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they spread the because there's multiple top time colors and models, right? I think they do
Yeah,
some
yeah,
motorcycle ones as well.
yeah. Deus, yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
No, I think collabs are. I think we're going to see more and more and more and more of them. I
Yeah,
think it's the market sees that they can capitalize on cross marketing.
yeah.
It makes sense. You reach a different maybe demographic or a different customer. Getting people back into watches, I'm all for it.
And but more specifically around that sort of retro racing feel, the sort of colored chronos and sort of contrasting colors that, pardon me, that were originally used, I guess, for visibility and usability and all that. You're kind of at the coalface of people who like that aesthetic. Do you think that that's grown or growing? Do you think that that's kind of a permanent part of the watch landscape going forward?
I think we've seen over the years we've seen a massive rise in sort of the retro aesthetic and the reissue.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what it stems to, but I was around 2015 when I started. Big brands hadn't started doing reissues
Hmm.
of retro aesthetic pieces from their archives yet. And I it's my personal opinion whether I'm right or wrong. I'm happy to be wrong, but I do think it was micro brands in general who saw this gap in the market,
Hmm.
took it, and the big brands followed suit in terms of they saw the aesthetic in the market was moving towards that retro aesthetic, and of course big brands, or especially the older brands who'd been around in that time, have a massive archive of designs that they could bring back.
Mm.
And I think we've seen it over the last few years. I don't think for the time being it's going to change. I think that that retro aesthetic and just the overall 70s, 80s, it's just a bit more out there,
Yeah,
and a bit more daring.
yeah,
I'm not talking horology here. That's something I think is completely different. That's the forefront in
sure.
horology, in our world, is sort of guys are always doing something completely one-off and unique. Max Buser, MBNF.
Shaken. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah,
it's all unique pieces. I'm not taking anything away from those guys. That's a different league, different category. Yeah, I do think though that the retro aesthetic, I think it's here to stay for the time being. I haven't seen any sort of trends that are taking over that, or taking away its shine. I think
for me,
people still
it's
enjoy it.
sort of, it's almost like, it's almost an endemic part of the design now. Like, it's like suits. Suits have kind of been the same since arguably the 20s, right? Like that was when, or the 1900s, where it transitioned from, tailcoats and top hats and horses and carriages and everything to a modern suit.
Yeah.
And now it's all just variations. One year the lapels are a bit wider and a bit, but it's the design of a suit is pretty defined. And I think watches are similar. Like it's we talked about the the Submariner being the perfect design, and the Speedmaster being perfect design, and
Yeah.
no, look, I agree, and I hope so. Can we turn for a bit to your own watch collection? Like, if you're happy to sort of talk about that.
Sure.
What sort of stuff do you like to collect, and any pieces that you're particularly loving at the moment, and pieces that you might have sold at some point and gone, shit, I really shouldn't have sold that.
Um, for my personal collection, this is not speaking Straton or Signum. I I I personally haven't sold a watch ever that I'd bought.
Well,
So I've still got everything that I've bought ever in terms of watches. I said I have a fairly large collection of 70s chronos. So Valjoux 7733, 34s, and from various sort of either micro brands, but also larger brands, Tissot Sea Star, for example. I've got my case is just there. But other than that, I got like a Tag Heuer Monaco, I got a Breitling Super Ocean Heritage Chrono. I could probably say a grail piece for me, which is let's say affordable, is what I'd like to get, is a 1675 GMT Pepsi. So it's
yep,
from my birth year, from 85.
lovely.
I'd really like one of those. Yeah. Other than that, I haven't been buying watches from other brands for the past few years, just because I've just got so many, that they just don't get the love they deserve. And I'm not a hoarder per se, so
Sure.
I want to give and use pieces. Always, it's a bit difficult as a brand owner, because if you're wearing your own pieces in your daily life,
Mm.
and you meet people, and it comes to discussion of what you do, and then you say you have a watch brand, but then you're not wearing the watch that you own,
Yeah.
that you make. It's a little bit I usually just say, yeah, it's my the day that I wear another brand. I do it a
Yeah.
few times a week.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Do
I
people
enjoy
really
other
question
brands.
that? Like, I'd kind of get it, like, especially if you're a watch person, like, you'd kind of get that, you can't just
Yeah,
you
well,
can't just
watch
wear
people
one,
get it. Yeah, what watch people get it. Um, yeah, I just think it's also nice, when it gets to that discussion that pe people actually can see. Oh, okay,
Sure,
you,
sure.
you made that, which is also quite nice.
Yeah.
It just adds an effect. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So is there one particular, because for me, like, I mean, my my collection started out as a collection, and then I'd sort of I resurrected a business that was slightly different from a few years ago, where we sort of drop shipped new stuff, and it sort of became handling secondhand watches. So I buy a lot of watches that they're 100% not mine, and I never put them on. But
Yeah.
there's certainly one or two that I mean, for me, my current absolute favorite is my Zenith Rainbow chronograph.
El
Uh,
Primero.
the El Primero, that the Fiora watch, or Fioro watch, for Furio watch, or whatever, from
One of my favorites too.
it's just super cool. Go right into your aesthetic with the colors, and and the El Primero movement. Like, I don't, you're not buying a better movement than that. So
Yeah.
that's never going to be on my anywhere near my marketplace. Have you got a specific favorite like that, like from of all of your watches that if you decided to cull the
That are
collection
not my
of all of them?
own.
Yeah.
Honestly, I wear the Monaco quite a bit just because I like, the square aesthetic.
Cool. Yeah.
Big Monaco fan. Um, yeah, yeah. I would say that would be the go-to piece if I'm not wearing my own brands.
I think for me, it's the reason I asked for a different one is that my creative outlet is music, and sort of
I
like,
wanted to ask, because when you say music, because I'm a bit of an audiophile myself, but I think you are as well.
yeah,
Maybe
you can
you
see,
got
you might see in the background,
some
there's
speakers in the
some
background.
two turntables and mixing deck, and here I've got all sorts of music production stuff. I've sort of DJ'd
Cool.
and just made tunes, bedroom stuff for years, and for me, it would be, if someone asked me, what's your favorite house tune, it would be far easier to answer somebody else's than my own, simply because especially in the process. And I would imagine that the process is somewhat similar, where when you write a tune, you're making the effects on the hi-hat, and you can always hear the
Yeah.
fact you never quite got the reverb right on the hi-hat, and so everybody likes the tune, but it's
What kind of house? Because
all
I'm a
sorts of
big sort
stuff,
of
like
deep
sort of
I'm a big
techie stuff.
deep funky house. Yeah.
Yeah, techie stuff, sort of disco house. I make a bit of drum and bass. Like, my friends and I all kind of, well, my friends and I kind of got to DJ here and there, but my friends basically ran the drum and bass scene in Melbourne in the 90s.
Okay.
My birth year is
Did that get
about 10 years before yours, so I was
okay?
probably partying a little hardier in the 90s and but yeah, basically, sort of drum and bass. A lot of the records you see here over my shoulder are original, drum and bass records from the 90s and early 2000s.
So would you say, because I know you're based in Australia, right?
Yes.
So you have a big influence from the UK, and the drum and bass scene was huge in the UK.
Oh,
Do you have
it's
a
all
lot of
UK drum
influence
and
from
bass.
there,
It's
or
all
it's all
UK drum
UK?
and bass.
Yeah.
It's all UK.
I have
Yeah.
a Spotify drum and bass folder, so
Oh, nice.
I enjoyed drum and bass as well.
Nice. I'll share mine with you as well if you like. It's I'll send you my tune. I've got a couple of tunes on SoundCloud, and I'll
Oh,
send
okay,
yeah.
cool.
But yeah, it's I think you've got to have a creative outlet.
Yeah, I think everybody
It's,
should have at least one creative outlet. Otherwise, life becomes too boring.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. So let's sort of just turning to cars for a little bit. I've asked a couple of my guests who are known car lovers what they think, why they think it is that so many car folk are watch folk. What do you think that connection? What's that connection for you anyway?
I think they're very much intertwined. I mean, watchers. I mean, you could go back to, you look at James Dean, you look at, racing, you know, watches and timing specifically were always sort of part of motorsport. I mean, that's a big influence for me, coming from a very modest, hardworking family. My dad was a hobby racing and rally driver, and collected back then. They were inexpensive, but we talked about it previously in part one. We collected Alphas and Lanciers, and I just think they're very much connected.
Yeah.
Cars and watches.
Yeah.
I don't think I could put it on any one reason why. You could look at the mechanical aspect of it, but I think it's more design, looks. I think if people appreciate sort of design aesthetic of cars, I think you can also very much appreciate design aesthetic of watches.
Yeah.
Even though a watch, I mean, a car is a motor, a gearbox, wheels, a chassis, a body. A watch is a bracelet, a case, a dial, a movement. It has moving parts. So, yeah.
I think to me, it's part of it's that combination of there's the mechanical bit for sure, but it's in both cases, it's this needless beauty. So a car, you just have to, can be a Volvo, the old Volvos is a box. It was literally how a child drew a car to fit the people and the mechanicals and get in. And then there's a Miura, and it doesn't have to look like that. And it's the same thing with watches, is that watches, they really have one job, is to tell the time, maybe the date, maybe time something, but they don't have to be colored. They don't have to have nice cases and all that. And I think that's a big part of. If we can we quickly continue a game that I started with Phil Toledano,
Sure.
Mr. Enthusiast. So we tried to find parallels between watch and car brands. So is Rolex the Porsche of the car of the watch world? Is Patek the Rolls Royce, or is it the Maybach, because there are people who make even better watches by hand? Or can you think of some parallels that you would think were fairly strong?
Yeah, I've seen sort of posts like this before. Yeah, so
But you must have thought, yeah, that's right, that's wrong.
some I could relate to, maybe others not. I don't have them in my head right now. Would I put Porsche and Rolex together? Even though a lot of the times you see wrist shots with the Porsche logo in the background.
Very
Rolex
often, very often.
Yeah. I personally, I'm not sure I'd put those two together, but I do see the reason why people do, just because you see it so often. Just trying to think now.
Just in terms of their actual market position, I'm thinking like in terms of the philosophy. So one of the people that I discussed this with was Max, and I said that I see MB&F to be like Koenigsegg. or Zonda. Like you're making it
Pagani.
for a
Yeah,
tiny,
yeah,
tiny, you
absolutely,
know.
absolutely. Yeah, they
Sorry,
I
Pagani.
can see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know what I'm
I can
saying.
see. Yeah, Zonda, Pagani Zonda was one of my dream cars back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly make parallels to, but even going back to like Omega, what would Omega relate to? Um, Trying to think now.
I think now.
What's the common one for Omega? Because it's Mercedes, but not really, because Merc, BMW,
I'd say Audi.
Audi. Yeah,
Yeah, because they're sort of, they've got
it has a motorsport aspect as well.
yeah,
Strong
and
motorsport
I'm
aspect.
thinking also like the Audi mottos Vorsprung durch Technik or whatever the
Technique,
forward through technology,
Vorsprung. Yeah, yeah.
and Omega, they did the coaxial. I mean,
Quattro.
I think it was George um, blank who invented the coaxial, but Omega did it, So um,
Yeah. No, that
I
sounds
think
right.
that's fair, like it's and the other thing is that you can also, if you buy a really simple dress, sort of entry level Seamaster, like, you can get into it for sort of A2 prices, like something that most people can afford, but it's not the most spectacular. And then you can also buy, a 7 Series and in from Omega as well for 35 grand, So
Yeah.
it's I think that's not a bad one. That's not a bad one. Who would you say? Okay, so I'll put you on the spot then. Alpha. Who is the alpha of the watch world?
If I say this, it wouldn't be because of styling, but more maybe because it's sort of an Alpha's always been sort of an outlaying enthusiasts type of brand.
Yep.
It hasn't got the massive popularity behind it like the mainstream car brands like BMW, Audi, VW, etc.
Yeah.
Alpha, maybe Urus.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
And
Yeah.
I don't say that
Yeah.
because of styling.
Yeah.
I say that because of it's sort of Urus is popular, but it's not popular.
I
It's
think
sort
that
of an
there's
outlaying.
parallels there. Like they make a very good product, but they make a product that is kind of targeted. Like a lot of their dive watches and all that. And Alphas are
Yeah,
really, it's a targeted brand. It's a driver's car.
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
they don't make family machines.
But I'm trying to think of if I had to bring in sort of the styling driver aspect, what watch brand? Um,
You can go vintage as well to make it maybe a little bit easier.
yeah, I mean, there the options open up a lot more. You've got Yema, you've got the vintage Yema, not the modern Yema.
Yeah.
Any car. Um, I think also I don't want to say yeah. I mean Hoya, obviously. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think Hoya's a good one as well for
yeah,
Alpha. And especially I mean, Alpha was, the first Ferrari was an Alpha, right? Like, so it's
yeah.
it's interesting. It's very interesting. Uh,
What would you have said for Alpha?
for Alpha, um, I wasn't thinking about it because I was busy listening to your answer, but I would say, I think any car is probably one of the ones that would have sprung to mind, I think.
Yeah,
But they, quite strong. you know, even in its day, not the massivest brand, but very distinctive design.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's not bad. Trying to think. I mean, the problem is that, especially when you bring into vintage thinking, like there are so many, like it's like everything else. Like I don't know whether South Africa had the same thing, and you know Switzerland has the same thing. But you know, I think it's worldwide that you know mum and dad shops of the butcher and this and that, like everything's getting absorbed by bigger and bigger conglomerates.
Bigger. Yeah, it's
You
true.
know, and so the watch world is sort of similar where, you know, Omega, Rolex, Longines, there, you know, throughout the market, there are a number of brands that might be 100 years old or whatever, in some cases even more. But there are so many brands that did amazing things. I mean, Universal Genève is a perfect example where there were a lot of companies that did, you know, racing watches, the Jackie X watches, and you know all sorts of stuff where it was all the same, and some of them are a bit shit, and some of them are better than others, and all that. But some of them, but that you know, someone like say Universal Genève, that you know those triple date moon phase tri compactors from the 50s, and you know, I mean they're just some of the most
And
beautiful
those
watches.
quad dials.
Well, just some of the
Had
most
to be.
beautiful
Yeah.
watches of all time, like in terms of that classic style, in my opinion. And that's the
Yeah.
problem is that, you know, cars, it's, you know, there are certain brands that have come and gone, but, you know, you can't really say that, you know, Seat had as much impact on the world automotive scene and, you know, perhaps BYD might going forward, you know, with their electric cars or whatever. So you know, it's a really, really interesting game. And I think that what I find very, very encouraging is that there are so many people who are having a crack at at you know, and I'm not talking about just the cynical one-off Kickstarter things that, you know, they don't really, you know, it's all a bit of a cynical thing, I think. But there are so
Yeah.
many people who are doing yourself, Andrea Furlan, Jonathan at Brew, you know, Clement Gord. Like there are so many people who are doing things that keep the watch market interesting and you know keep alive some of the things that are established that are really good, like that,
Yeah.
like this idea of the sort of retro design and everything. And so I think that that's, you know, that's one of the things that really excites me as somebody who exists on the periphery of the market, buying and selling the product, but and it
Yeah.
being really enthusiastic about the product, but not actually doing anything about it myself.
Yeah.
So it's great that people like self you know, are doing that. So
Yeah. I see the market is changing somewhat. We might have touched on this in the previous episode, but um, the market is certainly, especially in the micro brand market, people's collections are becoming full, and they're looking for something different,
yep.
and different to the point where it's either customized in terms of a movement
Mm.
or yeah. Um, it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years. Certainly, also with the massive influx of the Chinese factory brands, I
Yes.
see them infiltrating the Facebook groups. They
Yeah.
create fictitious profiles.
Yeah.
Um, you know, marketing in that way. There's a place for them. Um, I just think it certainly now we've seen now recently with Studio Underdog where one of the Chinese factory brands copied, you know, the ST19,
Yeah.
their chronograph. I don't know if you know Studio Underdog, but I'm sure you do.
Yeah, of
You
course.
do. Yeah.
I can't reach it at the moment, but I have a watermelon here somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Watermelon. Yeah. So
I must say
we saw the
I didn't love the pizza ones that came out, but good on them.
It was a bit of fun, but I think he's capitalizing on that. Fair enough. I think this recent episode he handled quite well. The brand owner Richard, where the Chinese factory brand made a copy of his watermelon one, but also they released a color which he hadn't done yet, and they called it avocado.
Yeah,
So
right.
the green and the yellow. And
Yeah.
what he did is he actually bought one on AliExpress,
Yes.
had it shipped to him,
Yeah.
and then made a video of showing the watch and saying, we've reached new heights that even Chinese factory brands are copying us.
Yeah.
But now we're going to take it a step further and actually release an avocado model.
Perfect.
So just
Perfect.
using that as turning it around instead of not accepting defeat, but would I like if a Chinese brand copied one of my designs? I'd honestly say it would sting a little bit, but
Yeah.
they do like a direct one-to-one copy. I'm not
Yeah.
talking
Right. Yeah.
inspired by it, but
But I don't think anyone, people who are going to pay 500 or $1,000 are not going to be fooling themselves that some $150, $200 thing is,
no, look,
you
these things sell. And that's the only reason why these Chinese factory brands are making them.
yeah.
When I say Chinese, there's no negative connotation towards that.
Yeah.
People sometimes speak badly about China, but without China, we wouldn't really have a watch. It'll take time for the watch industry to recover if suddenly China stopped supplying parts to the
Of
world.
course. Of course.
China is a huge, massive
No,
influence.
look, they certainly have different intellectual property practices
Yes.
than some other nations. There's no doubt about it. And look, I mean, again, this Studio Underdog is a really good example. They take something and that's why I didn't love the pizza ones, because the fruit ones are, if you're not looking for it, it's just a cool colored watch. And then you
Yeah.
realize, oh, actually, they look like pips, like the hour markers look like pips if you really look close. But then you've also got people at the other end of it with say, L'Aventure, where he's doing very, very high quality product for 7 or 8,000 francs. But it's beautiful product. It's absolutely amazing. Like I got one this week, and it's magnificent. I've handled a lot of watches from a lot of brands, and there's very, very few that I can look at and say everything on that watch was perfect. And this one,
Perfect.
there's nothing. Whether it's perfect or not is another thing, but there is not one aspect of that watch I look at and go, oh, geez, that's disappointing. Like down to the packaging and everything. And that's to me, that's really, really rich. I think that's fantastic. Through the podcast, I try and spread the word that one doesn't have to. We've touched on it, that you don't. I try and advise people, you don't have to buy one of the big four or mortgage your house to buy a nice watch. I've mentioned a few brands that I admire. Can you name a couple of brands that are out there today whose work that you might advise the Fine Watches listeners to sort of check out as being not necessarily cheap, but something that really represents something good to consider?
I think if I look at the micro brand scene, a brand that sort of started around the same time as me, I met the gentleman personally. I'm pretty sure you know his watches, Satori Billard.
Yes, absolutely.
So I enjoyed watching his journey because one of his first watches was actually a racing aesthetic watch.
Yeah.
And it was sort of customizable with a little bezel, but then he sort of went into a direction of bespoke to the point where he bought a Galach making machine to make his own Galach dials, and then the unique materials, and then just watching his journey, I think he makes a fantastic piece. And he's really carved out a space in the market for him where I think even he sold out, years in advance.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I respect his craft.
That's an interesting one. No one else. I love his the stuff that he's done over time, and no one else has mentioned that one. So that's cool. That's a nice one. That's a nice one. And the wrap up point for every Fine Watchers pod, you've mentioned one Grail, the GMT, the 85 GMT, and typically my question is your Grail watches to attainable, and the sky's the limit. Like, money's no object, rarity's no any timepiece that you could get. For example, mine is and always has been the Henry Graves Complication is my sky's the limit Grail. So that's where we're talking. So attainable and just blue sky.
Sure. I've just got to check the model name of which one it is, but the HM9.
Oh yes, yeah.
Which is
monster, absolute monster. Yeah.
Gives sort of also that sort of Star Wars, Anakin Skywalker type of,
yeah.
That's sort of in that realm, and I think affordable. I mentioned sort of it would be the 1675 Pepsi GMT.
Wait a bit, it's Rolex's down at the moment, so you'll get one.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me on the Fine Watchers podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure having you on.
Great. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.